think we're live, Alexander. Are we live? I think we're live. Yes,
Well,
we are live.
I think so. Yes, I think I saw a sign saying that we are.
Yes, we are. Let me just click the go live button on Rockfin. Everybody, please join us on Rockfin as well. Look for our channel on Rockfin. Help us grow on that platform. We post all our videos on Rockfin, and every Monday, me and Alexander do a stream where we record a live stream, but it's a live stream of our videos that are going to be published for Monday and Tuesday, and you get a good first look as to how we go about recording our videos. So definitely look for us on Rockfin. Of course, our main channel, our main community is on the Duran.locals.com. And hello to everyone that is watching us on Odyssey, Rumble, and YouTube. Hello to everybody. Hello to our moderators, our fantastic moderators. Valies, I see you, Valies. Thank you very much for helping us out. And I think it is just you, Valies. You and me. Looks like we're moderating this live stream. Alexander, how are you doing? Let's talk about some news. What's on your mind?
Well, lots is going on, and obviously the Ukraine conflict, in the sense, is at the center of it all. But it's if you like, it's the geographical center, but it's not the geopolitical center. It's now clear that Ukraine itself is a small part of a very, very much bigger thing. And the thing that really struck me this morning was reading a long article in the Financial Times, big piece about Germany, and how Germany, there's now enormous pressure from all our friends in the Green Party, Baerbock, Habeck, and all the rest, basically to sever Germany's economic connections with China. And China is, the way they put it, Russia is the storm, but China is the climate change. That's the real challenge. That's the real danger. Russia's just a storm, but China is the real climate change. And of course, German business is horrified, but again, they have no real influence apparently over this. And it's all justified by the fact that we should only trade economically and depend on people economically who share our values. And of course, if you're talking about the values of the Green Party, then I wonder how many people around the world share the Green Party's values. It seems to me that you will end up, in that case, only trading with yourself, because, to be straightforward about it, most of the world does not share the beliefs of the German Greens. But that's the pressure. And once again, you can see that it is these people who are in the driving seat. It is they who are pushing all of this. And it's all clearly now, it seems to me, the Greens, the neoliberals, the globalists, the neocons, all of them, what they're now trying to do, they're trying to create these dividing lines between us and them, what they call the democracies, which aren't really democracies anymore, at least not in my understanding of the word, and what they like to call the autocracies. In what sense these other countries are autocracies, it's never really explained. And there's a rather disturbing piece by Caitlin Johnson, also talking about the attempt to prepare us for nuclear war. And again, I was reading the other day, long piece in the Financial Times, talking about what the effect of course, it's always Russia using tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine might be. And it slipped in a really rather extraordinary thing. It said that, if tactical nuclear weapons of a very low yield, they might only do damage over an area that is no greater than a few fields. And only a couple of hundred people might die, which I thought that was a very disturbing thing to say, even if it's true, which for all I know it is. But that's the kind of thing you get all this time. And so you get this pressure of confrontation taking place in the West, this drive to make dividing lines, this geopolitical war. And you see the East gathering together. I say the East, the Eurasians, the rest of the world gathering together. More talk about the Russians and the Chinese launching a gold-backed currency. We've seen Putin bringing together Armenia and Azerbaijan in Sochi, talk about a peace treaty, apparently. All of that going on. So construction on the one side and dividing lines on the other. And it's not Cold War II. It's something much, much more ugly than that, much more kinetic. And of course, it's something that also spreads to our societies. So Ukraine is just a very small part of this conflict, though obviously we shouldn't underestimate its importance. Someone referred to Ukraine as the pivot, in the sense that whoever wins in Ukraine, even though Ukraine isn't big in itself, at least in terms of its geopolitical weight, but whoever wins in Ukraine is going to have the advantage moving forward between these two camps. But it's the emergence of these two camps and the way in which they are becoming opposed to each other and the kind of rhetoric that you see in the West that is really very disturbing.
Thank you, Elena, for that super sticker. Commando Crossfire says, Civil war for the soul of a nation. This is a struggle to save civilization. Demonstrations, overthrowing the occupation, the annihilation of mental colonization. Sounds like lyrics to a song.
Yeah, it just doesn't
Commando
do, but,
Crossfire.
Pretty good lyrics. True.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pretty good lyrics. And thank you, Commander Crossfire.
Thank you, Commander Crossfire.
I'm going to put on my glasses so that I can read these things better, actually. I hope it doesn't bother people. But
no, you're a little bit pixelated, so I don't know if people can even see the glasses.
If you even notice.
Yeah. You're all pixelated, but let's get to some more questions here. And hello to everyone that's watching us on Telegram as well. Thank you to all of our Telegram members. Thank you, Joy, for that super sticker. And here we go from Stigma Galispera. How about something stupid? Zelen in Slavic languages means the green one, male. How about Zelenscreen as a nickname? It's true. Zeloni. Yeah, it is true.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. Actually, I think it's really good.
The Great says, anyone else find it odd that Pelosi goes sleep at night with his phone charging in the bathroom instead of on a nightstand? Yeah, well, the whole thing is a bit bizarre. Maria,
it is very bizarre. Yeah, very bizarre. Anyway, we must be careful what we say.
Maria, thank you for that super sticker as well. Alexander, what you said, whoever wins this conflict. I mean, I saw Putin speaking to the press in Sochi with Armenia and Azerbaijan. And when the reporter asked Putin about whether these recent strikes, which in your video, you called them the most devastating yet. And I agree with you there. When the reporter asked Putin if these strikes were connected to what happened in Sevastopol, Putin said a part, yes, part of it, yes. But he also said that we can do a lot more. He said it very calm, very confident. And then he said, Bajalsta, the next question, please. I mean,
yes.
Ukraine is fading. Russia is just getting started. That's how I see it, to put it in very
absolutely
terms.
I completely agree. Fading in every respect. Its counteroffensive has ended in failure. It's losing ground again. I mean, we were both seeing this morning more reports about what's going on in Ugledar and in Bakhmut city. It's apparently losing men again at a horrendous rate. And I saw a report from TASS, which is the Russian news agency, but they've been collating information apparently from the various Russian sources. And they say that Ukrainian casualties over the last 2 weeks have trebled The rate of them has trebled. And of course, the economy is collapsing under the weight of these missile attacks. The energy system is collapsing. There's now growing concerns that hyperinflation is on the way. The government talks there about the situation becoming catastrophic. And there's even talk about evacuating the cities. Now, this is a disaster. It is a disaster of biblical dimensions. And you see Putin, as you said, very calmly, we can do an awful lot more. And everything that he has said in this respect has come true. I mean, he's never bluffed. This is a man who doesn't bluff. And I think that's a point people should never forget about Putin. When he talks in this way, he means what he says.
Yeah. Ryan says, always great to see the live stream to discuss the news. We truly live in astonishing times. The more this madness goes on in multiple countries, the more I lose hope. The West is in full decline. Can I just say that going off of Ryan's tweet, going off of Ryan's tweets, going off of Ryan's super chat, it's not only the war on the ground that that the West, NATO, whatever you want to call it, is losing. The economic war, the social war, the power structure war. I mean, in the UK, 3 prime ministers in 2 months. I've said this about the UK. I'm saying it about the EU and about the US. If they want to stop the slide, if some countries even want to save themselves from collapse, they need to get out of this conflict. They really do. And I'm not, being dramatic about it. They need to get out of this conflict ASAP and maybe start to repair the relationship with Russia, because many of their problems are on the supply side of things. So, it's not a matter of money printing or any stuff like that that's going to help. They need to fix the relationship with Russia and hope that Russia does decide to reciprocate.
No.
What do you think about that?
I completely agree. I completely agree with that. If I can just talk about Britain. Today, the headlines in the British newspapers are that the Sunak government is going to introduce enormous tax increases. Now, the tax burden in Britain today is the highest it has been for 70 years. That's our starting point. We have huge price increases. Inflation is now running well over into double figures. I mean, whatever figure they give you, increase it substantially. Mortgage costs are growing. And on top of that, on top of this enormous tax burden that we already have, we're going to get more tax hikes. Now, this is a terrible crisis. It's the public in Britain is being hammered. And the root of it all is this crisis with Russia. And of course, no one in the political class is prepared for the moment to make that connection. But unless they grasp that and start to do something about it, we are going to go from economic crisis to economic crisis, from political crisis to greater political crises. Instability in the West, in Europe, is going to increase as people search around for alternatives when the actual solution is there staring at you in the face.
Yeah, well said. Jeanette says, hey, I charge my phone in the bathroom of the master bedroom, which is what I thought of when I heard that Pelosi charged his phone, which means he probably went into the master bedroom and that bathroom. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Let's see here. From Elvis, the world would be a dark place without Duran. I was just listening to Sky. After many months, nothing surprising, baffling, where Sky, BBC, other propaganda channels here in the UK get their facts. Alexander, I was listening to a newscast. I think it was CBS News, and they said that Russia is walking right into a trap at the moment. The Russian army is walking right into a trap that Ukraine is setting for them.
Yes, of course it is. I mean, this is the Ukrainians have them surrounded. I mean, it's inevitable. I mean, they'll entrap the entire Russian army, and then of course Moscow, and then after Moscow, Vladivostok. I mean, again, what planet are these people on? I mean, this is clearly a trap. Ukrainian losses are a fantasy. The Ukrainian economy's collapse is a mirage. The missile strikes aren't really happening. The electricity system isn't actually down. I mean, yeah, but we've got to accept the trap.
You're breaking up a little bit, Alexander. Okay, there you are. Great. What happens when the hryvnia? You're good now. You're good. What happens when the hryvnia reaches the same level with the dollar as the ruble?
Yes, I mean, if that happens, then well, first of all, the Ukrainian economy will decelerate, will implode even faster. But at that point, there is no point any longer in people in Ukraine holding on to hryvnias, because they might as well then go for rubles, because the ruble will, the differential in wages, in living standards, will become simply impossible. And given that the ruble and the hryvnia are now almost circulating in parallel with each other in many regions, you can see the attraction.
Keep an eye out for that. Keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
Paul Duncan says, will we find out who sabotaged Nord Stream?
Yes, eventually we will. It will take time. But eventually, one day, the story will come out. I mean, Robert Barnes actually said it on a live stream that we did with him, that one of the problems with the people who did it is that they can't resist the temptation to brag about it. And we're going to see more about that coming out anyway. But sooner or later, we will find out the truth. I think we all know the truth anyway. I mean, to be honest, I think we already have. We've all figured it out. If it wasn't the people we believe, we would have had flat out categorical denials.
Let's see here. From Matri Putra says, as I watch the Western leaders in a seeming suicide pact, I keep thinking, those whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad.
Attributed to Euripides, the playwright, and perhaps actually said by him in one of his lost plays. But absolutely true. I mean, I completely agree. I mean, whom the gods destroy, they first make mad. Anybody who looks at the situation in the West, and we've been saying this for years now, not just recently. I mean, ever since we started the Duran, there is a kind of mental derangement which has taken hold and which is getting worse.
From, let's see here, from Alva Emotions, good morning to all the Duran audience. Thank you for that. Mama Laska says, 2014 overthrow of Ukraine, 2016, Clinton loses to Trump, starts Russiagate as a psyop on the collective West. Clinton was not to be the first woman POTUS, but to take down Putin. It won't matter who is in power.
I've come to exactly the same conclusion. Yeah, carry on.
No, I was just going to say, going off of that super chat, I want your thoughts on this article, which was on the Swiss publication Blick, I believe, blick.ch. I don't know much about the publication. It looks like a good outlet, but they were saying that there's now a Russian government in exile in Poland that is having meetings, and they're talking about taking power in Russia when Putin falls.
Yes, I would not be surprised if that was the truth. In fact, I think it's highly likely that there is. But the problem is that creating such a Russian government in exile will only confirm in Russia, amongst the Russians, that this is a West, the nature of the Western project. And of course, basing it in Poland, of all places, is the craziest thing that you could do. I mean, it makes it absolutely clear who is controlling the strings. Now, of course, the other thing to say is that, of course, in Russian popular memory, one of the most disturbing things was the Vlasov movement that was created in Germany during the Second World War, which was an attempt to set up an alternative Russian leadership to the one that the Soviet Union had. And of course, many Russians had issues with Stalin and his leadership, and that's putting it mildly. But they could see immediately and quite clearly that this movement that was being created in Germany was basically a stooge movement. And of course, inevitably, when this alternative government is created, which it will be, I mean, we'll get the announcement in a fairly short time. When it's created, then of course those parallels with Vlasov and his movement are going to be made.
They have a government in exile from Belarus as well. I mean, just why don't they just create governments in exile for every country that they don't like? There's a solution. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you don't put too many thoughts in their heads. I mean, they might actually go ahead and do precisely what you suggested.
Oh boy,
Turkey might
Daz,
have
welcome.
one like that before long.
Daz, welcome to the direct community. Moon Dragon said, looking at the special operation, it seems to me that it's not only aimed at Ukraine, but the entire West. Yeah.
Well, I don't think that was the intention at the beginning. But if you follow the speeches that Putin and Lavrov and other Russian officials, Medvedev, are making, it's starting to evolve into that, because they've been starting to say for some time that this operation, the special operation, is the inflection point. It's the moment when the unipolar system ends and the multipolar system, the new multipolar system, begins. It's the crossing, if you like, of the river from the old system to the new, and that it's the special military operation that's acting as the catalyst. So they're actually increasingly talking like that, and I think that to some extent, a great extent, bears out what you say. I don't think that was the original plan. The original Russian plan. The original Russian plan was to go into Ukraine, get a deal with Zelensky, force him to the negotiating table, get it signed, end the conflict, and move on. But that hasn't happened. Because it hasn't happened, the stakes have been raised, and we see that Russian plan intentions have become much more ambitious than they were at the beginning.
Yeah. The war with Ukraine, the conflict with Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, ended on April 3rd, 4th, when did Boris travel to Kiev?
Exactly.
That's when the conflict with Ukraine ended.
Yes.
And since that time, it's been a conflict between Ukraine and, between Russia and NATO and all of these guys. Yeah. Exactly. Elsa says, good day, Alex and Alexander. Can you name 3 people you would like to have dinner with? 3 people you would like to have dinner with, Alexander.
No, I have lots of people.
Besides me.
I was going to say. I mean, I'm assuming you don't mean friends. I mean, our personal friends, because my wife and I actually host quite regularly. So, but
let's narrow it down. 3 world leaders.
3 world leaders. Well,
living world leaders.
Living world leaders. Well, I mean, Putin is obviously one. I'd be very interested to speak to Putin, actually, and have a discussion and get a proper sense of what he's all about. And Modi would be another. Actually, I find him an interesting, intriguing man, and I think he would probably have a lot to say, which I would be interested to hear. And the third is Orban.
Yeah. Good picks.
Yeah.
Good picks, Alexander. Virgo Rising says a few words on Christine Lagarde's comments about the inflation and her ad hominem attacks on Putin. Yeah, she lost her mind during that interview with RTE. I mean, she went cuckoo for Cocoa Pops.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I don't have anything to add to that, because that's I mean, it's incredible to think that she's a central banker, and anybody who watched that interview would come away with the conclusion that the future of the euro is, let's say, not in good hands.
Is she an economist, or she's a lawyer, isn't she? Or
no, she's not an economist. She's not an economist. She's not been a businesswoman. She's been a lawyer of a sort, not apparently a particularly good one, but most of her career has been in politics. She's a member of the political class, and she's risen in the same way as all of the others have. She just gets promoted all the time, however much she fails. I mean, it's been catalogue of failure. She was a bad finance minister in France, a terrible IMF chief, and now she's been, exactly as you would expect, a disaster at the ECB, where she does exactly what basically Macron tells her.
Yeah. Oh, my three picks I'm seeing. Okay, I'll say Trudeau, Liz Truss, and who else? Who else would I pick? Any one of these WEF? Yeah, we'll just pick one.
What about the genius in the Oval Office?
Because we have a lot in common because we're both Greek. So
yeah, exactly.
we'll have a lot in common to talk about. We can even speak in Greek. Yeah, I would like to just ask them flat out. How does it work?
Yeah.
How does it work, you guys? How do you guys end up in power? Just tell me how. How does it happen? Boy. From Slav, what is the probability that the EU and the US will descend into anarchy?
I hope it doesn't happen. I think in Europe we are at the early stages where, unless things are done soon, we could slide into that. Again, the situation in Britain is very bad. There's been a superficial stabilization in Britain since Sunak became prime minister, but it is completely superficial. Beneath the surface, everything is getting worse. And these tax hikes that he's now planning are going to make things much worse.
How are the people responding to the tax hikes? Do you have any indication, Alexander? Or?
I don't.
How do you think they're going to?
I think people are going to be driven to despair. I mean, just to give examples, we're now getting protests, for example, from parents because, of course, they can't get childcare. There's no childcare to be had in Britain at anything remotely like. I'm talking about, really small children, kindergartens, nurseries. They cost unbelievable amounts now, and many of them are closing. And there are people coming out and protesting about this. It is an unusual group of people to be protesting in that way, and that's just one example. And we're going to see more and more of this. I was in Oxford for part of the weekend, and I was astonished to see that two of the most famous pubs in Oxford. Oxford is a university city, as we all know. It's very famous for its pubs. Two of the most famous pubs have closed. One of them has sort of reopened, but in a very superficial way because its supporters have tried to put some money together to get it reopened. The other one, which is much more famous still, and is the one where J.R.R. Tolkien used to go, that remains firmly closed. And you're seeing this happening right through the high street. And I think it's happening at such a speed that people are to a great extent bewildered. And we're still at that point of bewilderment. We're not yet at the point of anger, but the anger will come.
Red Pill Scholar says, God bless both of you for your invaluable efforts. Thank you, Red Pill Scholar. Alexander, you've done this before. You actually mentioned this before. You've answered this before. But if Rishi Sunak was listening, and I know you're listening, Rishi Sunak, you're on the live stream right now listening, what would you tell him to do, Alexander?
Well, I think the first thing he has to do is, as I said, be straightforward with the British people, tell them the nature of the crisis, what the cause is, the fact that the situation is completely unsustainable. And the next thing he has to do, and it's absolutely critical he does this, is he picks up the phone, talks to Biden, talks to Ursula, talks to, well, whoever is really running things in Germany, whether it's Olaf Scholz or Habeck, and says sanctions have gone beyond any point of rationality. We not only, we just cannot continue this way. We have to start looking for ways to get out of this sanctions trap that we've inflicted on ourselves. And the first thing he's got to do is he's got to tell them straight out that this oil price cap idea won't fly. We've got to, it's going to devastate the London insurance market. And, a British Prime Minister ought to be concerned about that, but it's going to create major problems in the energy markets, and he's got to tell them, look, we said before the conflict that we wouldn't sanction Russian energy, and we've got to reverse this. The sanctions on Russian energy have been a total disaster, and going forward, we've got to try and find a solution to this conflict in Ukraine.
Claudia says, what about dinner with Giorgia Meloni? That would be interesting.
Well, it would be very interesting, actually. No, I mean, you asked me 3. I mean, I could extend that number considerably. I would be very interested in speaking to Meloni.
Yeah. Let's see. RD Patterson says, freezer and seizure seems to be the plan. What did you make of van der Leyen, the pirate of Brussels is what I'm calling her? What did you make of her comment where she said, our goal is not to freeze, it's to seize? And she said that they're looking for legal ways to do that.
Yes. I mean, when people talk in that way, when they say that they're looking for legal ways to do something, that means that they know that what they're planning to do is illegal. I mean, otherwise, why would you be looking for legal ways to do it? It is already an incredibly disturbing thing. And of course, when somebody wants to do something which they know is basically illegal, you know that they're going to do it if they have the power to do it, because legal constraints and moral constraints have collapsed. And they're going to seize Russia's assets. They're going to seize the 300 billion, if it is 300 billion, that they took from the central bank. They're going to seize the properties of Russian business people and Russian people who've invested and bought apartments and shares in companies. They're going to do this on a huge scale. And it's going to be appalling and terrifying because it's grotesquely discriminatory. It's illegal, as we've said. It's a plunder. It's an act of plunder. You described it as an act of piracy. That is exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's going to have a terrible effect on the world, on opinion across the world. People are going to be shocked by it.
They're going to pull out their money. Very wealthy, powerful people are going to start pulling out their money slowly, but they're going to pull out their money.
Or perhaps not so slowly in some cases.
Maybe not so slowly. Mm-hmm. From Ray, any predictions for the U.S. economy after midterms? Greetings from Central California.
I think things are going to go on getting worse. In fact, I think they're going to get worse a lot faster unless something is done again in the U.S. by the new Congress to reverse the policies that the current administration is pursuing. I mean, they really need, again, to put the... Oh, Brian!
Yes.
Hey, Brian.
Good
to see you.
Yeah, good. I didn't expect that. I just had some free time, and I finally got to catch you guys live. Yeah. So,
but I saw you on Telegram. That's why you posted on Telegram. So I said I'll shoot Brian off an email. Maybe Brian can join us for a little bit.
Brian, can I just say I've been following you. You've been on fire recently. I thought your video on mobilization, by the way, was one of the most outstanding videos anyone has done, explaining things, deconstructing this and demolishing all the myths that have been said about this, during this entire period of the conflict. And, since you're here, I'm going to ask you in a moment about your take on events in China and Xi Jinping's rise and all of that. But just to finish, I think things are going to get worse in the US, again, unless Congress puts on the brake, says this situation is intolerable. And what I mean by that is that they don't just try and stop these policies, but they've got to do something about the administration itself. The things that the administration is doing within the United States, the politicization of the Justice Department, for example, and the way it's being used to go after critics of the administration. That is incredibly dangerous. And unless you deal with that problem, you're not going to be able to solve problems like, what's happening in the economy, because everything is connected. And unless you somehow solve those problems, you can't hope to deal with the others. If you leave the administration that you have in place and you say, well, you can't send another $50 billion to Ukraine, they'll find a way to send it. They'll just go on doing, and I'm just giving one example. I mean, but they will continue to try to continue to do the kind of things they're doing now, not just about Ukraine, but in domestic policy. They will try and find ways around. So you've got to deal with that underlying problem, which is the administration that you have at the moment. So as I don't think that the new Congress will have the stomach for that, I'm afraid I think things are going to get worse in the United States as well.
What do you think, Brian? Midterms?
I absolutely agree. If you've been following everything that's been going on regarding Russia, regarding the Middle East, regarding China, this has spanned presidencies. It's been going on for years and years and years. It's deeply rooted in the special interests, the unelected special interests that are sending lobbyists to whoever's in Congress or whoever's in the White House. So unfortunately, I think Alexander is quite right, and also quite right about the government in the UK. I mean, it really is shuffling chairs around on a sinking ship. They're not addressing the giant hole in the side of the ship. So they're doing these superficial things, and they're not going to actually address the root of the problem, which both of you always say it goes to the sanctions. No one's ever going to touch those sanctions. So
no,
it's gonna
No.
Guys, Brian, the new Atlas, real quick. That's where you can find his channel. Alexander, you wanted to ask Brian about China. Alexander, just real quick. Alexander, way back when you coined the term the sanctions escalator. What step are we on now with regards to the sanctions escalator in China, Alexander and Brian? Where are we right now?
Well, I mean, we now have a chip war, which is getting incredibly little attention. It's not going to work. It's not going to prevent China, because China, I think I read somewhere that they produce 15 times more STEM graduates every year than the United States does. I mean, the idea that they don't have the intellectual and physical resources to sort this problem of chips out is just ridiculous. I mean, they already produce, I think they're already the biggest chip producer anywhere, and they can certainly upgrade beyond that. But what it's going to do is it's going to disrupt supply chains even further. Who does Taiwan, South Korea, all of these countries sell their most advanced chips to? Well, if you look at the numbers, their biggest customer is China. It's going to simply create problems for those economies. It's going to disrupt the development of the industries, the chip industries in these economies. Again, the people who are launching these things don't understand what they are doing. Or perhaps they do, but they don't care. But one way or the other, it's going to make our problems worse, and it's going to create more dividing lines. And it's going to make the Chinese say to themselves, well, now they've started with chips, where else is this going?
Absolutely. I agree with all of that. It is chips in China are it's the exact same thing with energy and Russia. They're trying to do this knockout blow, and instead they're just going to hurt themselves. And this chip 4 alliance, if you actually listen to what South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan, what they're all saying, and they're all saying that why would we want to join this alliance? I mean, basically, what you're going to do is strip mine our industry, take all of our intellectual property, take it for yourself, and then you're going to tell us we can't do business with China, who's our largest trading partner. And I do believe South Korea has huge investments actually in China. And Taiwan, not only are they selling chips to the rest of China, they also get most of their raw materials from the rest of China. So this would be catastrophic. This would be exactly as you see the energy networks in Europe collapsing because of these sanctions. This is going to do the exact same thing, but through chips. And again, there's even U.S. companies saying that NVIDIA, they make graphic cards and processors, and this is really important for machine learning. And even they are saying, well, you're telling us we can't do business with China. That's billions of dollars per quarter that we're going to be losing. That's what we were using to put into our research and development. That's why we're ahead of everyone. And if you tell us we can't make this money, that's less money for research and development. And then surely, just as Alexander said, China produces millions with an S, millions more STEM graduates every single year, thousands more in terms of PhDs. They're going to catch up, and then they're going to surpass the U.S. And so it's a choice. Do you want to do this spiteful, childish, and ultimately futile this campaign that you're on, or do you want to continue doing business with China, and then as they rise and prosper, you're going to enjoy. You're going to be a shareholder in that prosperity. I mean, which seems like an easy choice for me, but for the people in Washington, they've got these deeply rooted ideas about U.S. hegemony that stretch back decades. It's very inflexible.
It's not just in the US. I mean, I was saying at the beginning of this live stream, this is in the Financial Times today. It's the big read, big article on their front page. Germany struggles, interesting choice of words, with its dependency on China. And then you have a long article explaining why, that this is really dangerous for Germany to be dependent on China, and how it says the Green skepticism about China has only grown since last month's Communist Party Congress, during which President Xi stacked the Politburo Standing Committee with loyalists. China's lurch towards one-man rule, combined with the economics disruption caused by its saber-rattling over Taiwan and tacit support for Russia's war in Ukraine, have turned the country that was one of the most exciting markets for German business into one of its biggest risk factors. And it goes on and on and on about this, about how Germany must now end this supposed economic dependence on China. And you just read on about this. And for me, perhaps the most extraordinary passage, I mentioned it earlier in the live stream, was where the Greens say, we've got to start trading, instead of trading with countries like China and Russia, we've got to start trading with countries which share our values. Now, as I was saying, there are not many people around the world who have the values that the German Green Party has. So they won't be trading with many people. But if that's the economic policy they want to follow. But you can read through the article how German business is horrified, but also the enormous momentum that there is now to push forward towards decoupling, as they say, economically from China. And the fact that, Russia, that turned out badly, the fact that Germany is far more integrated into the Chinese economy than it is was with the Russian, that doesn't seem to be a factor that worries some of the people that you see there. I mean, you have Habeck, the economics minister, he's keen for this. You see Christian Lindner, who's not a Green, by the way, the finance ministry, he too wants apparently to break these links with China. And, you do ask yourself,
why?
Who are these people? Why exactly? Where is this going? Where will this all end?
Why?
So it's
why?
not just why? Yeah.
Why? No, Brian, why? Why are they doing this?
Well, I'll tell you why. It's the same reason Ukraine is self-destructing. They don't represent their nation and their people, the best interests of their country. They represent Washington. They were maneuvered into power with help from Washington, and then they answer to Washington. So why is Ukraine fighting this self-destructive war with Russia? Why did Germany, use the same word, decouple from Russia in terms of energy? Now they're doing the exact same thing with China. It makes absolutely no sense. And before all of this happened, when they were building the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and China was looking at extending the Belt and Road Initiative all the way to Europe, it really looked promising, like Europe was finally going to get out from under the shadow of U.S. hegemony, which has been cast over Europe since the end of World War II. And now it's not going to happen. And it's not even like, okay, they're not going to work with Russia and China, but at least they have this alternative. There's no alternative. It's just self-destruction.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if you ran a business the way these guys think, like Habeck and Brabak? I'm not going to sell coffee or food to anybody that doesn't share my values. I mean, this is how they think. When has trade between countries been about sharing values? I just don't. I don't understand these people's thinking. Or maybe this sheds light to the fact that these people in power have never, ever held a real life job, ever. They've never been out there in the world. They've never had to struggle. They've never had to wait tables. They've never had to manage a shop or anything, or manage people. Nothing. Because this type of thinking is like this is an ideology. This is not practical, realistic stuff.
And what values? That's my question. What values are they talking about?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. What do you think is this? I mean, I suppose one should ask what your views are about the party congress. My own view is that what it showed is stability. It showed a self-confident government, which at the same time is consolidating because of the fact that it sees challenges on the horizon. That was my overall impression of it. I did not get the impression of a radical break with Chinese policy in the past. And as I think I said on a video of mine, people who talk about the greater assertiveness or aggressiveness of China, I don't see this at all. I see China simply pushing back as others push against it. And the assumption always seems to be, you can impose restrictions on chips, you can play complicated games about Taiwan, you can abuse China's leadership, and the Chinese are supposed to simply sit back and let it happen and not respond. That's not how it works in the real world.
Well, I found your analysis on the Congress quite astute. You made a lot of observations that even I missed. So I thought you did excellent work on that. And I will add that we see the type of things the U.S. is doing openly to China, but there is a vast array of unseen things or lesser seen things. I cover Myanmar quite often. I cover here in Thailand quite often. The U.S. is subverting nations around China and attempting to maneuver into power the same sort of governments that are in Europe right now, irrationally turning on Russia and China. They're trying to do the exact same thing here in Southeast Asia. China has already built extensive infrastructure across the region. The US-backed opposition in Myanmar is literally attacking the pipelines that they have there. US-backed insurgents, or I guess you could call them separatists in Baluchistan, southwest Pakistan. They have literally attacked the Belt and Road Initiative infrastructure there. They've killed Chinese engineers. They made an attempt on the Chinese ambassador's life. So it really is like the U.S. likes to accuse Russia of hybrid warfare. This is hybrid warfare. This is the U.S. attacking Chinese infrastructure, making attempts on Chinese representatives and leadership, but doing it through proxies. But you can see that China is clearly under siege. And if you look at a map of everywhere the U.S. is involved, they have China surrounded. They have tens of thousands of troops in South Korea, Japan. They're always attempting to work their way back into the Philippines. They had been in Afghanistan, which shares a border with China, a short border, but a border nonetheless. So China, I think, is probably not doing enough. If it was reversed, if it was China doing this to the United States, you could only imagine what the reaction would be. I think China has been very measured and reserved in its response.
Brian, are you aware of an article that appeared in August last year, August 2021, in the National Interest by a man called Wes Mitchell, who is a former Deputy Secretary of State for Eurasian Affairs? So, quite a high-powered person. Anyway, he spoke about the need for the United States to avoid a two-front war. And the two fronts were Russia, Europe, China in the Pacific. And he made it very clear that he didn't want the United States to make any kind of concessions, either to the Chinese, obviously not the Chinese. He identified the Chinese as the major challenge, but he didn't want the US to make any kind of concessions to the Russians either. And in that article, and this was in August 2021, he spoke about creating for Russia a crisis in Ukraine. And I remember reading the article in August 2021, and I can distinctly remember the article at that time saying, arranging a defeat for Russia in Ukraine, which seemed extraordinary at that time. Now, if that was what it said, it's been changed, because I looked at that article again and those words aren't there anymore. But, we know that articles can be edited. Anyway, I'm going to stick with the thing, defeat for Russia in Ukraine, with the purpose of changing Russia and redirecting it towards the Far East. And he then gave the parallel, the comparison with Bismarck changing the direction of Austro-Hungarian foreign policy, Austrian foreign policy, in a way that was conducive to American interests. He didn't quite say make Russia an enemy of China, but essentially that was what it was all about. The most interesting article at the time when I first read it in August 2021, I thought this man must be, off his marbles. I mean, it seemed to me absolutely crazy that anybody would be talking in that way, and incredibly dangerous. But since then, I've thought about that article a lot. I've seen other people who've referenced it too, so it clearly created a stir. And I can't help but think that this is the underlying frame of what we've seen happen over the last year. That this is a mechanism. The Ukraine war was basically a mechanism to change things in Russia, force Russia into some kind of dependence on the US, and use Russia to complete the encirclement of China.
I had not read that article, but I have heard many things like that. And this has been the plan all along. For decades, they tried to use China against Russia or then the Soviet Union. And now they would like to do it the other way around. But who at this point is going to fall for that? I mean, who in Russia, what opposition are they going to use? But we see them setting up this government in exile. So the way I see it is they're out of time and they're rushing to put all these pieces of the puzzle together, even though it's actually not part of this jigsaw puzzle. It's part of another one, but they think it's close enough, so they're going to try to hammer it in. And this is what they're doing. They're rushing to get all of this done because they're out of time. Every year that goes by now, China and maybe even Russia at this point are going to be stronger, and the West is going to be getting weaker. This self-destruction that they're going through. So I think that is something definitely to keep a very close eye on. I mean, that would be something they would dream of doing, changing the government in Russia, getting all of that energy flowing again, and then turning them on China. Yes, absolutely.
I mean, the other thing I just wanted to mention in connection with all of this, which goes back to the administration's economic policies, was that, of course, when the administration came into office, when the president was inaugurated in 2021, I mean, he was going to run the economy hot. The administration was going to run the economy hot and boost the growth rate. And it was, again, people don't ever mention this now, but it was explicitly said. It was, I mean, I read it many, many times that they were going to overtake China in the rate of growth. And of course, we were saying on the Duran at the time, this is only going to result in inflation, which of course is what it has done. But even the economic policy was to a degree which people perhaps won't acknowledge, driven by geopolitical concerns, this rivalry with China, this idea that you can somehow push your foot on the accelerator, the fiscal accelerator, and that will lead to the growth rates rising to 7% per annum. Those are the kind of figures people were talking about, and that this was going to surpass China and consolidate again the US's position as the world's biggest economy. I mean, fantastic stuff and utterly bizarre stuff. By the way, as he's Sparky, just to mention this, just mentioned that the West can save effort by using Juan Guaido as Russia's leader in exile.
Yeah, just recycle the guys in exile.
Absolutely, yeah.
What do you think, Alexander, about the? I saw a question in the chat about the fact that maybe you can sort out Ukraine by somehow getting the Poland on the west and Russia on the east.
Yeah,
which seems like a natural break, I guess. What do you think of that?
Right. It's possible. I mean, you can imagine these things. I'm going to say something about. I mean, Putin, when he gave that press conference a short time ago, this was the press conference at the Valdai session. He was talking about how Ukraine was created, and he mentioned how, amongst other things, Stalin gave Ukraine historic Polish lands, and he took them from Poland and he took them from Hungary, and he attached them to his Ukraine. Now that did, it seemed to me, again, leave open the idea that perhaps some kind of deal might be done. On other occasions, he's, however, given the clear impression that any Polish intervention in Ukraine is something that he would very, very strongly oppose. My own gut feeling about this is that relations between Russia and Poland are so bad, and that there is so much suspicion now in Moscow of the current Polish government that such a deal is simply not practical, even if it's, just happens. It's going to be too messy to organize. And of course, if we're going to get a Russian government in exile in Poland, will Poland recognize it? Will they take away their embassy from Moscow because, this is the government that they now recognize, the one in Warsaw? But if a government like that in exile is created in Warsaw, then, I think any kind of communication, dialogue of that nature between Russia and Poland becomes impossible.
What's your take, Brian?
Yeah, I don't see Russia being able to work with Poland on anything. I mean, Poland is practically involved in this conflict right now, just like the rest of Europe. The leadership there is compromised. They are making decisions that are contra their own best interests, and answering to Washington essentially. And so the idea of, at the very end of all of this, I mean, could you imagine the Polish population that has bought into this narrative, the Western narratives regarding Ukraine? Imagine how they would react if Poland was suddenly agreeing with Russia on anything, even if it was something like regaining long lost historical territory.
Yeah. I can't see it, and I'm certainly of that view. Karen,
it's done. You can see it on the screen right now. It's done. A lot of people are talking about this. This story is gaining momentum. This text, which hasn't been confirmed. We have to say that.
No.
I mean, we haven't seen evidence that this was indeed the case, but it's picking up a lot of momentum. And actually, I saw a statement from Zakharova who said something along the lines of, "I don't care if there's evidence about this or not. I don't want to see any of it. I want to hear from the UK." She pretty much said. Where is the UK in all of this? Where's their statement with regards to the drones, with regards to Nord Stream? I want to hear from them. I don't want to read tweets. She was like hinting at a statement, some sort of denial, some sort of dialogue.
Yeah, what has happened in Britain, and it's very suspicious, and it's extremely interesting, is that instead of a straightforward denial, or a straightforward statement of explanation about what they say has happened, we've had a curtain of silence fall. There have been reports in the British media that there have been leaks for, that phones have been hacked, not just Liz Truss's, by the way, but various ministers' phones have been hacked, and that there's been a major breakdown in security of communications in London, and that lots of things have been, percolating out. But these are stories which have appeared in the media. There's no official statement about them from the British authorities. And the closest we've had is a statement from one British minister, I think it was Michael Gove, who, I may be wrong about that, but whichever it was. But it was very interesting, because it was a good example of a non-denial denial. It was one that, if you read it superficially, it seemed to poo-poo the story, but it didn't actually say that the story was wrong. So we don't really know what is true here and what isn't true. And we've got to be very, very careful about, specific emails or texts that Liz Truss may or may not have said, because in this kind of vacuum, it's an invitation for people to fabricate things. And please bear in mind that if somebody wants to discredit the story, knowing that it's essentially true, one easy way to do it is to fabricate a tweet or an email, or not a tweet, an email or a text. Have everybody say, aha, that's the proof of it, and then prove that email or text was never sent. And then you can come around and say, well, you see, all these people, they're engaging in conspiracy theories, which again diverts you from perhaps the bigger question of whether there's been a security leak. I think there has been a security leak. We did a program about this. In fact, I've no doubt that there has been. If there hadn't been, there would have been a simple, straightforward denial. There was that very strange trip by the British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace to Washington to meet Lloyd Austin. I'm assuming that what happened was he was summoned to Washington and given a very severe dressing down and told this has got to stop. And, America is absolutely furious about what's happened. But I think that there's been a security breach. It shows you the incompetence of the British leadership and political class, the sort of childishness with which they conduct themselves. But be careful before you assume that anything like the "it's done" thing is necessarily true. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying be very, very careful until we have a little bit more information, which I suspect at some point we will, by the way. You can't keep this story quiet forever. But until we know a bit more, be very careful not to be led up a garden path by people who may, be doing things with the intention of putting you in a position where you lose credibility.
Liz Truss doesn't strike me as the type of person that you would let in on a covert operation to strike critical infrastructure, something of this magnitude. You just wouldn't tell someone like Liz Truss. Just my instinct is that no one would have told her. How would she have known? I don't think she would have known. But that's just speculation on my part. But I agree with Alexander. We have to be very careful. They've done this many times before, where they float something out, everyone attaches to it, and then they sink absolutely everything with it. They torpedo it, and everything sinks with it. Then they'll say, well, anyone talking about Nord Stream 2 being the work of the West are also liars, because look how they went after that tweet. Yeah.
Right. We have to be very careful. This could be some sort of
a
certain letter came to my mind, which they did the same thing during the elections in the United States. And I think both of you guys know what I mean, where they put this whole thing out there, and then they reversed things on on Trump and MAGA. Yeah, exactly. I agree with you guys fully.
Yes.
Ronald said, seems to me the Western leaders have the objective of destroying their own countries. Can you think of any instance where a Western leader other than Orban has appeared to put the well-being of his own country as an objective for his actions? And Torontonian says, love your analogy, Alexander, about the Russian plane, the catalyst of the SMO. Do you guys think of a leader?
No, was the short answer. Now, the big question is it stupidity? Is it incompetence? Is it delusions? Or is it intended? I'm going to say this. I always go back to the Munich Security Conference, which took place just before the fighting began. And I remember watching these people, all of them. They were there. Kamala Harris was there. Baerbock was there. Habeck was there. Boris Johnson was there. Macron was there. And my overwhelming impression watching them, and that was when I really, because up to that point, I didn't think there was going to be a war. But then I watched these people there. And it looked to me, they were in a state of intoxicated euphoria. They were really thought that they were going to do something spectacular and big. And I really think they believed, and they were all sure, that the Russia is a house of cards. If you sort of put a couple of sanctions, especially if you go after the central bank, everything will tumble and that they would win. And I that is what I thought they were doing. I don't think they actually expected things to explode in their face in the way that they have done. And I think when it didn't turn out the way they expected, that they didn't achieve the economic collapse that they confidently predicted would happen, I think that's when they started to emphasize the military side. And I'm not going to say much about that because, Brian, you have unpacked this brilliantly. You spent all your time. I mean, I follow you on this. I mean, you are the absolute authority about this. All of these packages of weapons, all of which turn out to be rather less than people are led to think that they are, and which are gradually dwindling as the ability to go on supplying Ukraine with weapons is shrinking. But I think that was the plan. I think the hope was we haven't achieved this economic thing. Let's try a number of other things. Let's try the oil. Let's try oil sanctions. Let's try gas sanctions. That's not working. Let's pour money into weapons into Ukraine. Let's stage this great counteroffensive, and that will cause the Russian house of cards to tumble. Except, of course, that it hasn't.
You're absolutely right, and I remember when this all began, and this was when I was following the Duran every day, listening to you break down the economic side and this move that the West was trying to make to, just as you say, collapse the Russian economy, and it didn't work. And you can see now absolutely everything that they're doing. It's like they know it's not going to work, but they don't know what else to do. And these military aid packages, just as you were saying, I mean, they are dwindling. They are admitting they don't have the ability to replace the weapons and the weapons, the vehicles, everything that Ukraine has been using, that they started out with in February, that is now gone. And they just don't know what to do next. And they've painted themselves into such a corner because between the sanctions, now the energy crisis, trying to put, and look at how other things they tried to do it and it just failed, placing caps on the prices of energy, and that didn't work. That was never going to work, and it was so unreasonable even from the beginning. Just at face value, it was so ridiculous, and yet they tried it anyway. And does this strike you as someone who has a plan, or someone who their plan crumbled and they don't know what to do next and they're just flailing? And it's kind of the same way. It's that way with Russia. It's also kind of the same way with China. They just don't know what to do. You have the United States trying to, just as you were saying, surpass China. How do you do that when they have 5 times the population? They've got, they're developing. They have world-class infrastructure. You're not going to surpass them with 1/5 the population. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Alexander?
No, I just wanted to say, I mean, I judge very briefly on the infrastructure. I mean, I went to China in 2017 and I saw the Chinese railway system. And I mean, I was hearing from a friend about the railway system in Germany, which is in a state of utter collapse. The idea that China needs Germany more than Germany needs China. You only have to visit the two places to see now that just isn't the case at all.
All right. So BFT Eyes Wide says it looks like the U.S. and the EU are drowning in their geopolitical decisions and those unselected entities that control collective West political decision makers. What are your thoughts on the future of the Western society? And do you see any possibility that they will come to their senses? Do you see the West being isolated behind the Iron Curtain in the same way the USSR was? That's an interesting question.
That's a very
and
interesting question.
We'll take the next 15 minutes because we're going to have to end the live stream in about 15 minutes. So let's answer that question. And then if both you, Brian and Alexander, if you can just give everybody just the general summary as to what's going on in Ukraine on the ground.
Yeah,
I think that would be a good way to just kind of end the live stream. And all the questions, we're going to get to all the questions in a dedicated video as well. So we'll answer all the questions in depth in a dedicated video. But let's tackle the reverse Iron Curtain question, I guess. And then if both of you gentlemen will just give us a good summary as to what's going on right now in Ukraine.
Absolutely. I think it's a very prescient point, and I think it is already happening. Now, you see, I lived through the Cold War. I for a very long time during the Cold War, it never occurred to me that I would ever meet a Russian. I mean, because Russians didn't travel to the West. Who was preventing them coming in those days? Well, it was their own government. It was the Soviets had the Iron Curtain. They were keeping their people in. They were trying to keep, to the extent that they could, the West out. There was jamming of Western radio broadcasts to Russia. There was the Soviet Union. There was that kind of control. And of course, there was enormous censorship within their own societies, within their own society. Now, what is so strange is that we're reversing. We are keeping Russians out. We're making it incredibly difficult for people to travel to Russia. I mean, I was talking again to somebody I know who has personal interests. I mean, strictly personal interests for wanting to go to Russia. And trying to get to Russia from Britain today is an extremely complicated undertaking indeed. It's very hard. And, you can't take money with you, not easily. You get finding travel routes, but it's our governments which are doing that to us. And of course, that's Russia. But if we start doing that with one country, we're going to start doing it with more and more. And we all know about the kind of controls that we are experiencing within our own societies. I don't want to say too much because we are on a particular platform, but we all know what we're referring to. We see more of that all of the time. And I think we are in that situation where we are creating a new Iron Curtain around ourselves. And of course, you can already see that also homogenization of culture, conformity of thinking, enforced conformity of thinking, pressure on universities. My wife is an academic, so I know a lot about what goes on in universities, stultification of thinking, decline ultimately in science and technology, because if you have those kind of controls, you're going to see it happen too. And of course, autarky. I mean, because that's what that thing about Germany was saying. We only trade with people with our own values. We don't go outside. We don't trade with the rest of the world. We, in fact, keep ourselves ideologically pure by not trading with anybody who doesn't agree with us. So we're turning inwards, and it's very, very bad and very, very dangerous. But that's what we're doing.
I agree. That's well put. I mean, as you were describing what the Soviet Union was like, I was thinking in my head that is exactly what the West has turned into. And I'm just wondering how long that's going to last, because of course the Soviet Union was behind the Iron Curtain and then it collapsed. How far away is the West from collapsing? When you look at the situation with energy in Europe, manufacturing, everything that they are doing. How sustainable is that? How long can they go with that taking place? And then what happens to the West? I like to think that the circle of interests that are running everything into the ground right now, they're going to fade, and another more forward-thinking and constructive circle of interests will take their place. Hopefully, interests that will be able to work with other nations rather than stick with this idea of imposing themselves on all other nations, because they cannot, they should not, and it would just be so much better if they just got on board with multipolarism and cultivated a balance of power among nations rather than trying to, just dictate everything to all nations.
Yeah. What's the situation on the ground? 15 minutes, Alexander. Brian, what's your take on things?
Well, can I just say, before you start, Brian, I think that I'm going to say this, because I know you've had some pushback from various people. I think the way things are turning out is confirming your underlying hypothesis. Ukraine it's expending its blood, it's expending its weapon systems, it's running itself into the ground. And it's going to get a massive shock fairly soon when the Russians come. But I think before you discuss the actual, go into the weeds, if you like, that's how it looks to me. I mean, you got it exactly right.
Well, actually, Alexander, you've been doing an outstanding job every single day. I mean, I don't know how you and Alex, I don't know how you do videos every single day with so much information, not just focused on Ukraine, but everything. You start with Ukraine and work your way out. But yeah, I mean, I've been following and agreeing with your take. It looks like around Kherson, you've got Russia building up its defenses. It looks like Ukraine was trying to reach some threshold with disposition of forces on their side versus Russia, and the Russian forces just keep coming in and building up, so they never quite reached that threshold they wanted to be at to launch their offensive. But I'm going to err on the side of caution and just say that is pending, and people should watch out. I mean, Russia certainly thinks that there might be an offensive launched toward Kherson. We kept hearing about this pending offensive around Zaporozhye. It really never seemed like it came, and now Russia seems to be on the offensive in that area. And then just think about what it means that Ukraine is pouring reinforcements into Bakhmut in the east, but they cannot stem Russian forces pushing them slowly but surely away from the edges, and then are working their way around the city. What does that mean? That means their troops are overstretched right now. They cannot build up forces for these offensives and hold the rest of the line. They have the same problem Russia had. They are overstretched, but okay, Russia had the same problem. That is why they lost that territory around Kharkov. But Russia's bringing in 300,000 additional troops. And these aren't just people they pressed into service off the streets. They have a military background. They have all of this equipment coming in with them. I mean, you will see a train going by on a video in Telegram with more tanks on it than you will see, Western nations, digging up the last Soviet era tanks, and they're going to send like 10 to Ukraine. You will see more tanks on a single train going toward the front line on Russia's side. So, I mean, this is what's happening. There's this buildup. Russia is building up its forces. I still think, if Ukraine has anything left with these offensives, Russia is still going to play it safe. They will fight and defend if they can, and if not, they're going to save their manpower and their equipment. This has been the formula over and over and over again. They know time is on their side. For Ukraine, it is not. And look at how they are systematically dismantling the infrastructure. I think, Alex, one of the videos I was watching earlier today of yours, you were talking about how Putin is saying, we can still do more. People continuously conflated the special military operation with the idea that Russia was waging total war on Ukraine. It was not. And I think we can see that right now with what's going on with the infrastructure. We can see that Russia has the ability to escalate much further beyond what it's doing right now. Even now, they can still escalate further. So this is just like both of you have said, Ukraine is winding down, and Russia is just getting started. These
Mhm.
drones, I am trying to confirm this, but I am hearing some very large numbers in terms of daily production of some of these drones that have been wreaking havoc. I think it's the Duran too. They're talking about a very large number being produced per month coming online. I have to confirm that, but if something like that is true, what does that tell you about Russia's military industrial capacity versus the West?
Yeah.
What are these numbers that you're getting, Brian, again?
I keep hearing
Unconfirmed.
100 per day.
Unconfirmed.
Yeah, completely unconfirmed, but 100 per day, something like
Mm.
that. That sounds like a lot, honestly. But if that somehow is true, I mean, it's
Yeah.
how complex is this drone? I don't think that it's that complex,
Mm.
and I don't know for how long Russia has been setting this up, because they've been
Yes.
working on their drone program for years and years, trying to get it into order. So it could have been something that they had been working on all along, and now it's just coming online. It seems like something they would have
Mm.
wanted to have done by February, but maybe it just wasn't ready yet. But it just goes to show you the continuous buildup of troops in Ukraine and the continuous buildup of their industrial capacity back home.
Absolutely. Can I just say that this is perhaps one area, because where I can speak with some, direct knowledge, because of course I've been to cities in Russia where the military industrial complex is located. I mean, one place I know is Perm, for example, which is in the Urals. Perm is an industrial city. It's where Russia builds, or has been trying to build, its aircraft engines. And the point to understand, if you go to these places, is that they have been operating far below capacity. That's something which anybody who's any experience of industrial systems would see instantly, that the way in which the Russian industrial system functions, its military industrial complex functions, is very, very, very different from that in the West. It's based on the concept of surge. So, you have the knee, you press the button, you can then churn these things out in vast volumes. Obviously, you have to have a very complex supply chain built up around it to make that possible. But it exists, and you have, to a degree that, again, we don't understand in the West, because we have gone over to this, just-in-time system of carrying out, running our industries. The Russian MIC doesn't work like that at all. They have huge reserves of spare parts, of components, all of these sort of things, so that, when the surge comes, they can put things together, they can build them, and then at the same time, they're buying time for their production side to get going. So the reason that the Russians haven't been producing volumes, these huge volumes of machines that they always had the capacity to do, was because they chose not to. I mean, it was the investment in the economy was going into other things. And also, one has to say that there were very complex organizational structures, which I was coming across all the time when I was in Russia, that there were all sorts of people who said, we need to have American style management here, or no, we don't. We've got to do German style, or, we've got to go back to what it used to be. Well, of course, what the war has done, because, necessity imposes decisions, is it's caused a huge streamlining. And one of the things, if you go to the right sort of sites, you've been reading, you can read about how, the new prime minister, this coordinating council that's been set up, all of this is about streamlining these management systems, getting things cranking up, and they can produce these volumes. Their system is based on that, and we can't. I mean, Brian has been explaining this brilliantly, that you can't just increase production of 155 millimeter shells in the United States. You can't build lots of new drones or start manufacturing Stinger missiles, because the capacity to do that just isn't there. So it's a very different industrial structure from the one that we have in the West. And this war plays to its strengths and helps it iron out the accumulated problems that have existed, well, since before the Soviet Union broke up.
Absolutely. I was also going to say I saw Earl Wagen Zavod. This is the big tank factory where the T-72 and T-90s. I mean, they still have a tank factory running, and it doesn't even matter how many tanks are coming out, because they're more than tanks coming out of Eastern Europe to be sent to Ukraine. I mean, and they have all these tanks in reserve that they can bring in and refurbish. So I mean, I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know what the West was thinking when they went into this, how they thought this was going to play out.
All right, let's do 2 quick questions and then we're done. Real quick, do you think that what you said about Poland and Russia, do you think that carries through with regards to Russia, Hungary, Transcarpathia region? Do you think Russia could get into a dialogue with Orban if we get to that point? If we get to that point, do you think he could sort something out with Orban and Transcarpathia?
Well, possibly. The two men like each other and they trust each other. The problem is very difficult to do it with Hungary and then not with Poland. And I think the problems with Poland may mean it's less possible to do it with Hungary. I think there'd be some kind of understanding between the Russians and the Hungarians about Transcarpathia. I think that could be sorted. But, you know, whether it would actually involve transfers of territory, well, that's a completely different issue. And to be frank, I don't think anybody in Moscow or in Budapest is thinking about that at the moment. I think we're not yet at that stage where those kind of discussions are even taking place.
All right. Thank you, Eurogabor, for that. And the final question to Brian and Alexander is on the inflation. I think there's an interesting one. What do you guys think is going on there in the economics in Ukraine? Yes. They report around 20% year over year, this chat says, but I think that is massaged. Can a complete monetary collapse end the war?
Sooner. Well, there's been a very good article about this, actually, which I read just about 3 days ago. And by the way, it puts inflation. It says that the actual official rate of inflation is now 27%. I mean, not a bit higher than that, but it is being massaged. What is happening at the moment is that there is enormous support for the hryvnia, for the Ukrainian currency, and it's coming in the form of financial transfers from the West. The West now, to a great extent, covers a huge part of Ukraine's budget. But of course, there are problems, because if you are paying people's salaries, which is the West is doing, if you're paying the salaries of the army, which the West is to a great extent doing, if you're trying to pay pensions, but the production side of your economy is imploding, which in Ukraine it is, and if your taxes are collapsing, which in Ukraine it is, then you have a very artificial system. You don't have a proper monetary system or even a proper fiscal system anymore. And that kind of system is very vulnerable indeed to hyperinflation. I would have said, well, first of all, without these financial transfers, we would be in a hyperinflation situation already in Ukraine. It would have probably started around midsummer. But with these transfers, it will come, but in a slightly different form and in a slightly at a slightly later timetable.
Brian,
last word to you. How does this war end? Will it end?
Oh, how does it end? I don't know. It's so hard to tell. I think Russia is we're going to see it. It's hard to predict exactly when, but we're going to see an inflection point where Ukraine's fighting capacity begins irreversibly collapsing. What they're doing is unsustainable. It's just a matter of when. When does that happen? When does Russia make its move and start pushing? And when that starts to happening, it's not going to stop unless the war ends or the West tries to intervene, say like creating a buffer zone or something. And the fear here that I have over the buffer zone concept is that they have already done it in Syria, and they may think that they're able to do it again. They may think they can deconflict with Russia again and carve off a little piece of Ukraine. And I don't know what happens if Russia says no. That's the risk that the West is dealing with this whole situation.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, gentlemen? Brian, the new Atlas, everybody. Brian, the new Atlas. That is the go-to channel. Brian, Alexander, final thoughts before we sign off.
Well, I mean, we're not at the end game in Ukraine, but I think we are approaching the point where we are going to have the end game. And I think, and echoing and bouncing off what Brian just said, that's going to be a particularly dangerous moment, because all of these political leaders in the West, they've invested so much of their credibility, the credibility of the Western alliance in this, that the temptation will be enormous to try to do something big that can somehow retrieve the situation in some way. And of course, doing that against a nuclear superpower, which is what Russia is. I mean, it may not be a superpower in every respect, but nuclear weapons, it is most emphatically a nuclear superpower. Well, trying to do that, especially when trust has collapsed so completely, well, that is going to be incredibly dangerous. And logically, the West shouldn't be doing that. They should be talking to the Russians now, but of course they're not. And that does make one very worried.
And I agree with what Alexander said. And I will add that the United States, its allies, are not just thinking about losing face and having their system crumble because they lost in Ukraine. They're also thinking about what the implications will be regarding China, because they are, whatever obsession they have with Russia, their obsession with China is many times greater. And if they concede in Ukraine, then what does that mean for everything they're trying to do with China? So there's so much at stake, and they have such a weak hand. It's very, very dangerous. I agree. And I just want to end by saying this is quite a treat to be on a live Duran show that I just was lucky enough to catch live. Now I'm on it. Thank you so much.
Thank
Wonderful,
you, Brian.
wonderful surprise and pleasure for us too, Brian.
Thank you for jumping on. Thank you for jumping on last minute, Brian. We really appreciate it. The new Atlas, check out that channel. Also the Telegram channel, the new Atlas as well, if you're on Telegram. Let's end it there. Thank you to everybody that watched us. We'll end it on Island Popsicles, a super chat right there. That is a good super chat. Island Popsicle. Everyone that watched us on Odyssey, Rumble, YouTube, Rockfin, and the Duran.locals.com. Thank you very much. Thank you to our moderators as well. Valley S, thank you so much, Valley S, for helping us moderate. And I added another moderator. But gosh, William Justice, I believe, was the other new moderator. Thank you very much for helping us out there. Take care, everybody. Have a great, what is today? Tuesday? Have a great Tuesday. Take care.